it's kind of appropriate that I talk right after uh, the presentation from Law, because I'm actually going to talk about AI, and this has a lot of contentions in law. But I think there's one thing that we do agree on in terms of, so I'm going to first talk about data, and I'm hoping that I can get through all of this in 5 minutes. But basically, we kind of all agree that open data is a good thing. It accelerates research. It also benefits AI, and AI can bring more benefit to research. It also supports organizational commitments like the National Library of Scotland, who talked in the morning, and they actually are committed to providing as much data as possible because the public demands like open data, and you also want to engage the public. And however, as many people have already pointed out, the conflicts with the issues of privacy and also data protection. I mean, I don't want to go into the intricacies of the different notions around this, but it also conflicts with fairness in some situations. And as it happens, actually, privacy and fairness also conflict with each other, because we tend to bunch everything into the same pot as ethics. But actually, there are situations where if the data is closed because of privacy, then you cannot properly assess how fair it is, because you cannot determine the distribution of the data according to different protected characteristics, for instance. So it's a complex situation. And there is a tendency for us to immediately say automation bias, and highlighted, in fact, just this Saturday, the Herald reported some movements in the Scottish Parliament about introducing regulations around AI or automation being used for decision making. However, I would like to point people to this other article, which is written by Jennifer Logg in the Harvard Business Review, which points out that actually these failures of the AI and algorithms highlight the places where we are going wrong ourselves as human beings in decision making, because it highlights where there's bias in the data, and that data is created by us, not by the algorithms, at least initially. So in the same vein, I think privacy also is the intricacies of privacies and the issues around it are highlighted using AI. If you, the AI failure kind of highlights where we would not have thought of privacy issues before in terms of data. And some of that is reflected in the global partnership on AI. And this organization, I mean, it includes both fostering AI research for innovations, but also a lot of issues around the ethics, around human values and transparencies, explainability and privacy and security and so on, as well as the need for cultural change around this whole area. And as it happens, yeah, it was just mentioned a moment ago about how privacy has to be in the design, but at Google, they already include privacy as part of the design, as well as trying to build in testing for safety, as well as fairness and social benefit. So it's not that people are who are doing the AI research itself are not aware of the issues. There's also a lot of discussion around whether we should use machine learning in different situations. And Google has produced a couple of tools, What If tool and Facets tool, to increase explainability of algorithms as well. So there's a lot of work going on in this area, and highlights a lot of conflicts, not just between AI and privacy, but also privacy and fairness, whether we can actually assess the data for fairness, privacy and open data. So if we close certain parts of the data, then what do we do to the utility of the data is also an issue. This all highlights a very important issue, which is the complexity of privacy. And it goes back to something Gareth said about the identifiability. So identifiability isn't just about the personal data. Now it's much more complex because we put out so much data there. In fact, in digital forensics, they've already shown that just by having complete metadata, you can find out all sorts of things about people, their health problems, their identity, and so on and so forth. It's not just about having the actual personal data. So it seems like we need to start asking key questions about who we're trying to keep the data from and have a more nuanced approach to privacy. For instance, control of data can actually now be passed to the creators at very fine granularities rather than just whether the document is accessible or not. There's, of course, standard approaches where you use encrypted data for machine learning as well as scrubbing the data. This is something that's already been used quite a lot, but also more nuanced approaches where you add noise to create obfuscate the actual identifiability of the data, as well as federated learning where data doesn't move from your device at all is being used. So yeah, lots of things are going on, and it's I think it comes back to various different things that it's not just a matter of closing the data. Closing the data doesn't solve the problem because anybody could actually hack into the data these days. This is not uncommon. And so yeah, creating these kind of silos in data doesn't help. Creating silos in cultural approaches to AI and data doesn't really help either. We need to engage more and maybe build a trusted environment for dealing with these kinds of things, because we cannot just say AI should not be used. It's there now. It's being used all across the board. So how do we deal with this? And then we come to the archives. Uh, so I wanted to put it kind of put this all in the context of archives, and there are 2,805 listed archives at the National Archives UK, and you can see that it really ranges across a very diverse range of different types of archives, and all of these have different missions and different workflows. So how do you just say any one archive, give a set rule to deal with privacy and open data across all these archives? That's not possible. Also, as somebody mentioned just this morning, Rachel Hosker, about the fact that you can't look at all the material in digital data anyway, because volume is increasing, complexity is increasing. Most of the archives do not have data which is anyway directly applicable to things like differential privacy, which I mentioned earlier. So how do we actually apply those kinds of principles in archive is an issue. And so I kind of think that there should be some sort of cultural change, because so far we've been concentrating a lot on AI to make sense of data and search and retrieval and recommendation and visualization, but actually and the metadata extraction and sensitivity review using AI and so on. But actually, maybe where our focus should be in is on establishing archive data as a valuable source for AI, having archives join the AI community in some way as part of the broader ecosystem and developing trusted environments in AI. So this is the last slide, just so you know. So I want to suggest and kind of call for cooperation across the community to that we should actually develop open archive data for AI. So it's not, I don't mean we give off all the data that we have in the archives for AI, but we should start trying to transform data for AI to be used in AI. And this might be through things like Kaggle and OpenML, but it might be just a matter of producing Jupyter notebooks for people to use, for instance. Developing OpenAI for archive data is also useful. So we said earlier, federated learning that allows data not to be moved from the actual archive, and you can actually share these models across the archives to produce better models, both for things like sensitivity review and also making sense of data and so on and so forth. But finally, this may appeal to those people who are legal experts. There could be better environments in place for trusted AI-related data and sharing. So standard agreement policies that you can establish so that it's easier to share these kind of data. So that's me.